Welcome to another mailbag session. Remember, these are questions and comments you guys leave on the channel. But before we get going on this session, remember, normal parish notices apply. So if you haven't subscribed to the channel, why not? Hit the subscribe icon. If you want to be notified when new content hits the channel, it's the bell icon's the one you need. If you like the contents of this video, give it a thumbs up. Consider becoming a member of the TMTG community. It's always a big mouthful. The address is down the bottom, as are the Facebook and Instagram tags. Go tag me over there. But now back to the video. The next one comes from Marvelous Mixing Miguel, who I think is a DJ with a title like that. And this was in response to Kordbot setting up the MIDI and the switches on this thing sitting behind me. And that was done in March 2019. And he writes, would you recommend this unit to someone that creates EDM music? I know very little about music theory. I've been a DJ for over 30 years. I create tracks on Ableton Live. I play the synth by ear. I plan on learning the wheel of fifths, chords, etc. But I will never dedicate as much time to learn how to play the piano. I play keys on my Novation Launchpad. I think it's easier than playing the piano. I see this as a replacement for the piano keyboard. Changing scales is so easy on the Launchpad. It's time that the piano is improved. Well, in response to that last point, you're never going to improve the piano, unfortunately. It's kind of ingrained into music, so you just need to kind of change your workflow to work with it. And then he wrote again saying, I found this today. Is this a better unit? It's called the Theory Board. I don't know if it allows you to control external synth, but it works for a DAW. And then there's a YouTube reference, which is very interesting. So, you know, I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer the question on theory, because I'm kind of in the same boat as you are, Miguel, in that a lot of the theory that I've learned because I've had to digest something to do something, rather than actually being formally taught music theory. Yes, I have been to music lessons when I was younger. Yes, I can read music. No, I can't sight read music very well. I do have to kind of sort of read it and memorize it, but then I can play it and sight read it at the same time. So practice makes perfect kind of thing, I think it is. But I can only really give you my experience of using the Kordbot, and I use it for composing and writing, which are posh words for playing around on the keyboard, which is kind of where most of my stuff comes from. In fact, actually, I think for a lot of people, it's kind of where the writing of songs comes from. They play with something, they get a riff, they get a combination, and they kind of develop that out, and that sort of becomes the nucleus of a song. Definitely most of the people that I've been engaged with over the years in terms of music, that's kind of how they've written stuff. They play around, something comes to them, lyrics come, and it works like that. So that's kind of my workflow, if you like, and because that's kind of my workflow, the only thing I can really give you is my use cases. So these are where I think the Kordbot works really well for me. The first is the what comes next conundrum. So you've played a sequence of chords and you're trying to work out what is the next chord in the sequence, or the next series of chords in that sequence. And I find that sort of the chord progression, being able to play around with sort of minors and majors and diminished sixths and all kinds of weird and funky chords to get you from one transition phrase to another transition phrase, is actually really useful on the Kordbot. And that was predominantly the reason why I bought it, because I saw Brad at Isla Instruments demonstrating it that way. The second use case is I want to run an arpeggiation. And what I find the Kordbot allows me to do is very quickly set up a simple or slightly more complex arpeggiation on it, running through a chord sequence. And that is I find really, really useful when I'm trying to sort of get the melody in my head, and if I want to use an arpeggiation as a bass line or something like that, or even a melody line, the Kordbot is actually quite useful for that sort of stuff. It's not sort of Juno106 arpeggiation type stuff, or the complex arpeggiations I could do on this thing, but it's simple. Okay, it's not a complicated machine to use from that perspective. There are more complications to it, but it's not a complicated machine to use from that perspective. And they're the two use cases I use it for, and I find it quite an invaluable tool for that style of engagement. In terms of the second part of your question, in terms of this new, what did you call it? You called it the theory board. Now, I've watched the video, and I was originally thinking, oh, this is quite interesting. However, some alarm bells rang for me. And the alarm bells were along the lines of, I don't think this is a product yet. So I think that this company has done exactly the same that Isla did and launched a Kickstarter project. And the whole idea of Kickstarter is that you say you need X amount of money to develop a product, and people effectively buy it at a unit cost, and you develop the product, and when you've finished developing the product, you put it into manufacture, and then people who've effectively bought the product get their unit. I think that is one of these. And the reason I say that is because I think the video was incredibly slick. I think it was probably too slick, if I'm honest. I haven't seen very much of people playing this on YouTube generally, which always is an alarm bell for me, because if this was out in the general population, I'd expect to see loads of people playing it, raving about it, dissing it, whatever it happens to be, but I'd expect to see that, and I'm not seeing any of that. So I think this is a Kickstarter project. It says it's going to be around $700, which is double the price of this thing, and it does look very useful, but until I see more about it and I've got confidence that this is actually a company and not some sort of scam or something else going on, I probably wouldn't buy it. So there you go. And at $700, you know, at $300, there's kind of this sort of price point, I suppose, where you go, I can afford to lose that. But as you start getting more and more money in these Kickstarter projects, and you know, you start heading towards $1,000, you got to say, can I afford to lose $1,000? Well, maybe some rich people out there can afford to lose $1,000, but I definitely can't. But when this came up at $300, there was a question, and the question was, could I afford to lose $300? And I sort of made the judgment call on that. And the last thing I would say about the Kordbot is we are still waiting for a whole raft of bits and bobs to come from Isla. And I'm hoping that very, very shortly we'll see a firmware release from Isla Instruments that will produce the missing bits of functionality. Now, bearing in mind, I am recording this ahead of time, so it is possible, and I know Brad is saying that in the next week or so we're expecting to see some stuff arrive for the Kordbot. So it's possible that by the time you watch this, another firmware release has been released and dropped. Next one comes from Black Mirror WWG1WGA. And they write very similar subject to a recent mailbag I did on the Jupiter on the System8, and in response to Roland System8 out of the box first review, a video I did in November 2016. So that's when I got the Jupiter8. Sorry, not the Jupiter8, the System8. Sorry, and he or she writes, Jupiter8 plug-out is included straight out of the box, but the Juno106 plug-out is not loaded even when available until the free 2017 release. In addition, the 1.02 System8 firmware update also provides extra Jupiter8 patches. To access these, you need to perform a factory reset after the firmware. And that's all very, very factual stuff. So the tuber is absolutely correct. The original System8 shipped with a Jupiter8 plugin, but it didn't ship with all of the Jupiter8 plugin. And it didn't ship with the 106 either. So the 106 was something that happened afterwards. And it was commonly understood at the time that the Jupiter8 was basically launched missing bits. And that was purely because Roland didn't want to move the release date. That's basically the reason why. So they launched the synthesizer without some of the Jupiter8 patches and without the 106. And the marketing people basically spun it along the lines of, we're going to give you this free stuff, which they did by publishing 2 further patches. One of those patches was the Jupiter8 patches that were missing from the original base release of the firmware, and the second one was version 1.11, which was basically gave you the Jupiter 106 patch. Now, the important thing about, or one of the key points that was raised in this query or question, was the fact that if you do a patch update on one of these platforms, you really need to do a system or factory reset. And the reason why you need to do that is because basically, if you do a factory reset, what then happens is it then will load everything into memory from the firmware chip that is on the machine. And when it does that, effectively it wipes out everything that's there and puts all the new stuff in correctly. So the way Roland do it is they don't basically load into current memory. They load to the firmware chip first, and then you do a factory reset and it refreshes everything into the memory. Hopefully that makes sense.